The sun had barely risen over the golden stretch of the savannah when the villagers heard a strange sound echoing through the dry air, not the roar of a predator, but the weak, desperate cry of a man. His name was Daniel, a geologist from the city, who had gone missing after his vehicle broke down 5 days earlier. He was out there somewhere, alone and dehydrated, beyond the thorn trees and termite mounds, where even the hyenas didn't linger after sunset. Most believed he was dead. Some whispered that no man could survive that long without water, not under that sun. But just as the search was about to be called off, something happened that no one could explain. A boy from the village, Tembo, was herding goats near the edge of the grasslands when he saw the lion. Not just any lion, this one had a limp, a scar running across its left eye, and a slow, deliberate way of walking that made it instantly recognizable. It was the same lion that had once mauled a poacher and survived a bullet wound, and ever since, the elders called him Yuku, meaning legacy. But this morning, Yuku wasn't hunting or resting in the shade. He was carrying something, a piece of meat, dangling from his jaws. That wasn't unusual. What shocked Tembo was the direction he was walking, straight into the dry hills where no prey lived, where no pride waited. At first, Tembo thought the lion was burying food, or bringing it to cubs. But Yuku was alone. He followed from a distance, crouching low through the bush, heart pounding. The lion moved with purpose, pausing only once to look back, locking eyes with Tembo through the tall grass. It wasn't a threatening stare. If anything, it was almost knowing, as if he was inviting the boy to see something. Tembo pressed on, careful not to snap twigs or rustle leaves. He kept his goats nearby, but his eyes were fixed ahead. That's when he heard it, a cough, raw and broken, coming from behind a rock formation. Daniel was barely alive. His skin had blistered, lips cracked open, his eyes sunken and vacant. He had curled into the shadows for some protection from the heat, but the damage had been done. Tembo watched in disbelief as Yuku dropped the meat beside the man, gave one slow nod of his head, and backed away. The lion didn't attack. He didn't growl. He simply sat a few meters away, watching. Tembo didn't dare move. He just stared as Daniel, with trembling fingers, reached for the meat and brought it to his mouth. By the time Tembo ran back to tell the village, he couldn't speak. His voice was caught somewhere between fear and awe. The elders gathered, murmuring prayers and calling it an omen. A lion fed a dying man, one of them said. That is not nature. That is something greater. No one knew whether to believe the boy, but his eyes told the truth. And when they followed his trail back through the thorny bush, what they found changed everything they thought they knew. Daniel was still alive, barely. He lay there with blood on his face and meat clutched in one hand. Yuku was gone, but his paw prints remained, deep in the cracked earth. The meat was fresh to have been left behind by another predator. The trackers said it came from a wild beast, likely killed just hours earlier. But what lion gives up a kill? What lion walks alone to a place with no shade just to feed a dying human? The men lifted Daniel into a stretcher made of wood and cloth, whispering prayers as they did. He stirred once, muttered something about a golden shape watching over him. They carried him back slowly, careful not to disturb the balance of whatever miracle had occurred. By the time they reached the village, word had spread. Old women wept. Children ran barefoot to the path, trying to catch a glimpse of the man who had been chosen by a lion. No one could explain what had happened. Not the trackers, not the scientists who later came asking questions, not even Daniel himself once he regained enough strength to speak. All he said was that in his most desperate moment, when he had given up and whispered goodbye to the sky, a shadow had appeared, not dark, but golden. It didn't hurt him, it watched him, and then it fed him. That night, the village lit fires in a wide circle and sang songs to honor Yuku, not as a beast, but as a spirit. Some believed he was the soul of an old warrior. Others said he had been touched by something divine. But one thing was certain, no one would ever look at lions the same way again. The savannah had given up one of its dead, and in doing so, it had rewritten the rules of life, death, and mercy. And as the stars emerged over the open sky, a low growl echoed in the distance, not of hunger, but of something ancient and sacred. The lion had disappeared, but the story had only just begun. In the following days, Daniel's condition hovered between life and death. His body was weak, but his mind drifted in and out with strange clarity. He spoke of dreams where he followed golden eyes through endless plains, of warmth pressed against his side during the freezing nights, and of meat dropped gently beside him without a sound. The villagers cared for him with reverence, feeding him broth and placing cool cloths on his brow. But no one dared question what he had seen, not yet. Not until they had seen the lion again with their own eyes. Tembo was the only one who seemed completely certain. Each morning, he returned to the dry hill alone, retracing the lion's steps. And each time, there were new prints. Not many, just one set, walking in, walking out. No signs of aggression, no dragged carcasses, no other animals. Just Yuku. One morning, Tembo found something different, half of a haunch, untouched, lying near the same rock. Daniel had been brought back to the village, so who was the food for now? The boy stood there in silence, feeling the sun on his back and the weight of something unspoken in the air. Word reached the nearby town, and with it came outsiders, journalists, rangers, and skeptical biologists. Most didn't believe the story. Lions are opportunistic, one said. If a man was dying, he wasn't fed, he was being softened. But when they saw the pattern, the prints, the food, the absence of attack, their theories fell apart. One ranger, a hardened woman named Salma who tracked lions for years, stood in the sand and stared down at the paw prints. "This lion's not hunting," she said quietly. "He's waiting." As Daniel began to speak more, his story unfolded in trembling fragments. He had collapsed after 3 days without water, and he had truly expected to die. He remembered the sound of breathing before anything else, slow, steady, and powerful. When he opened his eyes, Yuku had been beside him, eyes glowing in the dusk. The lion didn't pounce. He circled him once, lay down a short distance away, and closed his eyes. Daniel was too weak to be afraid. The next morning, the meat was there, then again the next day. Yuku had stayed nearby, never too close, never gone for long. The villagers, especially the elders, began to murmur that this was not just a lion. This was a guardian. Some believed that Yuku had been sent by the ancestors to protect the man. Others said it was penance, that perhaps the lion had taken a life in the past and was now repaying a debt. Either way, there was something unexplainable happening on their land, and to many, that meant it was sacred. But with more outsiders coming each day, the harmony was at risk. Thalma warned the villagers. "If he keeps coming near humans," she said, "he'll be labeled a danger. They might shoot him to prevent future attacks." That night, Tembo wept. He couldn't understand how something so good, so pure, could be punished. He asked the elders to protect Yuku, but they were powerless against the laws of the rangers. Daniel, still recovering, made a decision. He would speak. Not just to save the lion, but to honor him. With Tembo's help, Daniel gathered what little strength he had and appeared before the officials who had arrived. His voice cracked, but his message was clear. "That lion didn't just feed me," he said. "He chose mercy when instinct said otherwise. You can call it unnatural. I call it a choice." Some scoffed, others listened. But something in his words, or maybe in his pale, scarred face, held them still. The savannah, Daniel said, was trying to teach them something. Something humans had forgotten. Despite objections, a temporary agreement was made. The lion would not be hunted or tranquilized. A protected area was marked around the dry hills. No tourists, no traps, no interference. It was a fragile peace, but it was enough for now. Daniel watched from a distance as Tembo placed stones around the place where he had once lain dying. In the center, a single paw print hardened into the mud. And one evening, as the wind swept across the tall grass and the light turned orange with dust, Daniel returned to the place. He stood still, breathing deeply, his heart pounding not with fear, but with hope. A sound stirred behind the trees. He turned, and there he was. Yuku, watching from the shadows, eyes golden in the dying sun. The lion didn't move. He didn't need to. The message had already been sent. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. His body still ached, but his mind was clear. He had to choose return to the city and forget, or stay and protect what had saved him. The lion had made his decision. Now it was Daniel's turn. He looked out over the savannah, where darkness crept in like a tide. Somewhere out there, a beast had shown mercy. A man would now have to find courage. Daniel didn't leave. Against the advice of doctors and family, he chose to stay in the village. At first, It was just to heal, his legs still trembled under his weight, and the sun burned his sensitive skin. But each day, as the villagers brought him food and Tembo sat by his side with stories of the land, Daniel felt something inside him begin to reassemble. He started to walk again, first with a stick, then on his own. And every morning, he would climb the ridge above the dry hills and wait, scanning the horizon. Not to see Yuku, but to feel him, somewhere out there, watching. Yuku didn't return right away. For weeks, there were no prints, no signs of his presence. Some believed he had moved on, others feared the worst. But Daniel refused to despair. He spent his time learning the land, the animals, the seasons, the rhythms of survival that had once nearly killed him but now offered him a new language of living. He helped Tembo build a small shelter near the ridge. They called it Kichwa-cha-mani, the place of peace, and that's where he began to write. He wrote everything he remembered, the pain, the silence, the shadow that became a companion. He wrote of the lion's breath, the raw meat, the feeling of not being alone. And then he began to write letters to newspapers, to wildlife organizations, to governments. Not to beg for protection, but to demand reverence. "This is not a story of survival," he wrote. "It is a story of a decision. And if a lion can choose mercy, so can we." Slowly, people began to listen. Yuku returned one morning at sunrise. Tembo saw him first, walking along the edge of the hills with his familiar limp. He didn't approach the shelter. He simply stopped, stared toward the ridge, and sat in the grass. Daniel watched from above, tears rising before he could control them. This time, the lion didn't bring food. He didn't need to. This was no longer about survival. It was a bond, quiet and unbroken. Daniel whispered, "Thank you." Yuku blinked slowly, stood, and vanished into the wind. The news spread. A documentary crew arrived, respectful and discreet. They filmed from a distance, capturing the savannah without disturbing it. Daniel appeared on screen only once, seated beside Tembo. "This is his home," he said. "I was just passing through. But he let me live." That clip went viral, not because of the man, but because of the lion's silhouette in the background, still and powerful against the rising sun. People across the world wept. Some didn't understand why. But they felt it. Reactions came quickly. A conservation group in Nairobi offered funding to expand the protected area. Local elders agreed to declare the dry hills a sacred zone, with no hunting, no fires, no trespassing. Daniel was asked to help design a program to educate children about wildlife compassion. For the first time, he saw his trauma not as a curse, but as a doorway. He hadn't lost his life in the savannah. He had been reborn there, but not everyone was moved. One night, Daniel found a note nailed to the door of the shelter. "A lion's still a killer." It was signed with a name he didn't recognize. The next day, gunshots were heard near the hills. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. Not everyone saw Yuku as a miracle. Some saw him as a threat. Fear, Daniel realized, was harder to kill than any predator. The rangers increased their patrols. Salma, the tracker, became a regular presence at the shelter, and her bond with Daniel deepened. She admitted she had never seen a lion act this way, and she had been in the bush for 20 years. "Maybe he's not just a lion," she said one night. "Or maybe he's exactly what lions are, when we're not hunting them." That thought haunted Daniel in the best way. It meant there was still mystery left in the world. Then came the day Tembo found another gift. Not meat this time, but a bone, clean, placed carefully on the same rock where Daniel had first been found. It wasn't for eating. It was symbolic, a message. Daniel held it in his hands for a long time, understanding now what it meant, a peace offering from one survivor to another. The lion had nothing left to prove. He had given the man the greatest gift of all, not food, not safety, but purpose. From that moment on, Daniel stopped waiting for Yuku. He started building instead. A small school near the shelter, a water well for the village. Programs for children who wanted to learn not just about lions, but about trust and mercy and the power of a single moment to change everything. The bond between the man and the lion was no longer about survival. It had become legacy. A year later, the savannah had changed, not in its colors or creatures, but in its spirit. Where once there had been fear and silence, now there was song and learning. The shelter, Kichwa-cha-mani, had become more than a place of peace. It was a living memory, etched into the lives of everyone who stepped inside. Children gathered under its canvas roof to hear Tembo tell the story of Yuku. He no longer herded goats. Now, he taught the names of birds, the meanings of animal tracks, and the quiet strength of listening before judging. Daniel stayed. He never returned to the city. His home was now a small hut near the ridge, built with the help of villagers and rangers alike. Each morning, he woke before the sun, walked barefoot through the cool dust, and greeted the day in silence. He didn't always see Yuku. In fact, he hadn't seen him in months, but he still left a gesture near the stone. A bowl of clean water, a few branches for shade. Not out of obligation, but out of respect, out of love. Tourists heard the story, but there were no tickets sold, no jeeps allowed near the sacred hills. The elders made sure of that. Those who came had to walk in silence, without cameras, guided by locals. Many left crying. Something about standing in that stillness beside the rock where mercy had once been chosen made people question everything they thought they knew about fear and instinct. It wasn't spectacle, it was pilgrimage. Daniel's letters were published as a small book titled The Lion Who Waited. It wasn't a bestseller, but those who read it often wrote back, sharing their own stories of unexpected compassion: a stray dog that stood by a dying man, a wild horse that shielded a child during a storm. The ripple effect had begun. One lion's act, in a forgotten corner of the savannah, had stirred something ancient in the hearts of strangers around the world. Tembo, now older, carried Daniel's message with pride. He began traveling to nearby villages, speaking in schools, telling not just what happened, but how it felt. He didn't describe Yuku as a hero or a monster. He described him as a being who had made a choice. Mercy, Tembo would say, is the strongest thing in the wild. Stronger than teeth, stronger than fear. His voice was quiet. People listened anyway. And then, one early morning, Yuku returned for the last time. Daniel saw him from the ridge, older, thinner, the limp more pronounced. He didn't come to the rock. He lay in the grass near the acacia tree, eyes half closed. Daniel approached slowly, heart aching. He knelt a few feet away and waited. Hours passed. The lion did not move again. When the sun set, Daniel stayed beside him. When night fell, Tembo joined him. They kept vigil in silence, honoring a friend, a teacher, a force that had turned death into something holy. The next day, they buried Yuku beneath the tree, using stones and earth to mark the place. They planted tall grass around it, so he would disappear into the land that had always held him. No photos were taken. No signs were posted. Just one word, carved into a stone nearby: Chegwo, the choice. Daniel continued his work, now not only as a survivor, but as a guardian of the story. He spoke at conferences and sat with tribal councils, always beginning with the same question: what if the wild is more human than we are? People didn't always understand, but they always remembered. And that was enough. Years passed. Seasons shifted. Children who had never known the full story still knelt by the rock to leave flowers or stones. No one told them to. It had simply become part of the rhythm of the place. A whisper in the wind, a roar in the heart. Yuku's spirit had never truly left. It had become something shared, across generations, across continents, across the boundaries of species. And in the final pages of Daniel's second book, he wrote, he didn't just save a man. He reminded the world that the most powerful instinct isn't to hunt, it's to protect. That's how the wild survives, not through fear. Through mercy. In a land where heat can kill and silence can break a soul, a lion had fed a man. And in return, the man had fed the world with a story that would never die.